So I'm starting in the sense capability, and I'm just going to run one of these live right alongside here. We're going to go through the telco churn demonstration, but I just like loading up this Formula One data set. One of our colleagues in Europe is a big Formula One fan, and the season just kicked off this past weekend. So he wanted to analyze some of the data on the sport and figure out, who was going to be finishing each race before the races began. Could he predict if someone was going to finish on the lead lap? And that's what this data set is. The reason I like using this data set is because it's completely raw. Most of our demonstration data sets are a little bit too clean, and this one is just a raw data dump, so you can actually see how the iteration process works from the sense capability. But just diving into it while that loads, what Aible does is take a look at each data set and identifies the data readiness. So it gives us a score from 0 to 10, indicating how strong the signal was in the automated evaluation model that Aible developed around this data set. We also see that there are a number of different issues that typically exist in enterprise data. And so Aible automatically goes through and cleans up many of those common issues to make it so the data set is usable. And so here with the Formula One data set, it just loaded. I'm going to indicate that I want to identify who is going to finish, in this case, on the lead lap of the race, and just tell Aible to evaluate. So the question earlier of what do we have to do to interact, there were a number of different columns there that I could have selected as my outcome variable. And I just decided that I wanted to evaluate if somebody was going to finish on the lead lap. But that is that area where you would select if there were other KPIs or other outcomes you were interested in. Now, with that data quality check, what Aible is doing is going and looking for common issues that lead the model development astray or make it fail outright. And we can see Aible has automatically cleaned up several issues here. It's identified some fields with very few repeating values and just indicating that it's unlikely that these are going to show up in our analysis. So lead ID and phone number for this sales data set. And it's also identified that there are several fields or several columns that have missing values. And so it's telling us it's going to impute those with the term missing. And it's also informing us of how frequent the missing fields occur, right? And this data set's not too bad. About 1% is about as bad as it gets. But we do see oftentimes you'll have some columns that'll have 99% plus missing data. And there we could be pretty sure there's not going to be a whole lot that the technology is going to be able to identify out of that. Now, Aible also is finding which predictors are important in the data set, and so we can see that in the AI readiness tab. It also gives us a little flag that identifies that certain factors are potentially strong indicators of our outcome, highly correlated. And that allows us to just check to make sure there's nothing problematic in our data set as we go through. And we're also giving recommendations around, you talked about, how can we improve the data set? Aible is identifying interaction terms that it's going to use. You can see these with the interaction mark, indicating that Aible is finding terms to interact together. And also giving us ideas for different transformations. These are pretty boring because they're mostly reciprocal and square. But we also do go in and identify time series. Here's a log transform. Do you want to pick out trends and things of that sort to help augment that data? And any of those that your team would like to include, you simply indicate that here, and then they will be used on the optimized side. Now, this Formula One data set that we just loaded came back, and if we take a look at how it scores against the other data sets, it has the highest score. Now, here, the telco churn data set we're going to go through, that's a little bit low on its score. And Aible indicates that the cursory model that we use to evaluate this is better than random guessing, but we're going to have to be careful going through this evaluation. This might be a data set that we want to lean in on and look for additional features that might benefit this particular analysis. And we'll talk about that as we jump into Explore. What we can see here on the Formula One data set and why I like it is because this is true to form to what we typically see with data sets we load into the system. There are features in this data set that know the outcome. The status tells you how that driver finished. And there are a ton of features here that are mathematically related to the outcome and are therefore inappropriate to use in an analysis. But not all of them are bad. We know who built the car before the race. We know who's going to be driving the car. So these factors we can leave in as we remove those features that are problematic and simply refresh this data set, and Aible's going to run an evaluation with those filters in place to see how much signal is left in the data set once we've removed those problematic fields. And then the final piece, Aible brings in an insights visualization where we tasked our design team with representing a machine learning model in a single visual, helping us understand how those connections are made and which features are important. And so as we go around the horn here, clockwise, kind of the 12 to 1 o'clock position, this is going to be your strongest feature. And you can tell the strength by the arc length. And as we go around, we see that these features shrink a little bit. But remember, this data set was evaluated and found to be relatively low in terms of signal. And we can compare the visual to a relatively stronger data set, and we see more connections, more bands. What these are doing is these are actually showing you the interaction factors. So each band is showing that there are interactions between different features, months in service, and the current equipment days, how long someone's router has been in place for the telco broadband use case. And these are things that will help us dive in as we get into the exploration and understand a little bit more about what's going on in this data. This is what I refer to as our ground penetrating radar. This is what helps organizations just very quickly scan in a matter of minutes across their organization which data sets could potentially help them. And it's a very raw cut, but it does in a matter of minutes what it personally used to take me several hours to go through and do all the correlation checks, run all my scripts against the data set. Being able to get that insight and all these visuals back in a matter of minutes is hugely beneficial. All right, so let's dive in and let's explore this churn data set. And we keep that consistent visual. So again, you can dive in, you can explore in any direction. And this is set up as a map. So we can find insights that are meaningful. We can orient them here on our pinboard, if you will. But I'm just going to dive in here and look at some of these patterns and see what's going on. Well, what I'm seeing is I have a huge spike in churn once I get to that first anniversary. In fact, some people are swapping us out before they get to that first anniversary, perhaps having a month of overlap or so. And I can drill down and see beyond just the surface level pattern, what are some other factors that are indicating or contributing here. And as I dig in, I can see that Aible's pulling out interactions between how old their networking equipment is. So when their networking equipment is newer, we see that it actually mutes some of that churn activity if they've just recently gotten their equipment upgraded. And we talked earlier about coming up with ideas for how we augment the data, and this is a relatively thin data set. We might want to bring more features in around some of these interaction patterns. This is a good one to understand perhaps in a bit more detail because we don't have details about what this networking equipment is. Right? We just know how old it is, but does it have built-in Wi-Fi? Does it have multiple Ethernet connections? What is this equipment? What was the equipment they were swapping out? Was it equipment that was 2 years old? Was it 5 years old? What is the benefit? Is there a throughput benefit? Is there a stability benefit? Why is it that the newer equipment is actually leading to lower attrition rates? And these are things where we can collaborate, and I can ask Greg to come in and take a look at this pattern because there's something interesting going on here. I'd like to understand a little bit more about how this equipment day is really leading to something important for my business. And we can take a look here. It's finding that this is pretty consistent up through the first few, at least few months that the particular device is in service. And as I pin those, it added those insights to my analysis. So again, I can build this out. I can build my map of insights as I go around and look for more details. And through this process, what we are looking to do is obviously we're going in and looking to find unique insights that could be beneficial to the business, but we are also identifying data issues. So Greg set up that Jeopardy question. Aible is surfacing the insights that are statistically important, but they can be statistically important because they're meaningful to the business, or they could be statistically important because there is actually some issue with our data. And so in addition to finding unique insights, we're also cleansing the data at this point. And what that is doing, I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to invite business people to the table for data imputation and cleansing conversations, but I find that people oftentimes do not want to engage. Those are the most boring meetings on earth, right? But here we are doing the same activity of understanding that data, and this helps us get the business teams engaged just so it gets a little bit more buy-in as we go forward and work with those teams. And we can see here, Aible has pulled out that 11 months is our worst churn month. And here it's showing all of the different equipment days. So we can see that benefit fades as we get to about a half year in age. It starts to just jump around. But that newest equipment, when somebody has new equipment, they're less likely to churn in the very near term when we find this pattern. Holy crap, we forgot. And this is one of the things I love is in a customer call, it is not uncommon at this point to realize, oh my gosh, we forgot to add promo data. That's the silliest thing, because that obviously is going to lead to how likely somebody is going to attrit after 11 months in their contract. If they have a super heavy promo, they may be more likely to jump than if they have a pretty nominal promo, right? Those are things that would be contributing factors. We've had people send us data sets on the call, load them up and go through them live. In that same time sequence that you saw with that Formula One data set, it takes about 4 minutes to get through that first iteration on a small data set, about 15 minutes on a large. And so oftentimes we can iterate without having to regroup and say, let's come back a week from now. No, let's see if we can actually tuck it into the conversation we're having and actually go through live results by the end of the call. And that's one of the critical pieces about the speed and about the automation that we have here is we've all been there where we say oops, and then we say all right, let's regroup in 2 weeks after we've run all the tables and done all the analysis. Right? By doing it this way, we can often get it done in an hour as opposed to spreading it out over a couple of weeks. And I've just got a few minutes left, so want to dive over to the AI creation side of this. So once we've got the data evaluated, we trust that we've got a stable data set. We can move over to the actual models that are going to drive those recommendations in production. And Aible does some unique things here. One is we understood that the communication, the understanding of the business strategy is a particular challenge, right? Good data scientists, we do this day in and day out where we sit with the business teams and we try to figure out, okay, what are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? What are your resourcing constraints? And we adjust thresholds, we select models appropriately. But it's hard to express and articulate to the business team exactly what's happening. And additionally, if you have more than one business group or product region, it can get very difficult to decide how do we cut that? How do we nuance this for each different group that has different behaviors? And what Aible does is allows us to subgroup across different projects or products, regions, whatever makes sense in terms of how you want to break out your resourcing. But Aible then runs unique sets of models. So, commercial has different models than mobile, than does residential broadband. And this allows us to balance and run an economic optimization over top. And what we do with that is we break this down to how businesses evaluate their own performance. And we use that to evaluate how the model is likely to perform. And we start with a baseline, which is just an actual period that you've had in the business recently, a reference quarter, a reference month. And then we enter how much has the team spent on retention efforts, right? What is the cost of having that team support and proactively reach out to folks who are likely to churn? How much do we retain in terms of lifetime value of that risk group? And then what is the overall cost of the business for the fact that you're spending time trying to retain people, you're still losing people, right? What is the net loss that the business has when we look at that churn activity? And then what Aible is doing is running an optimization and saying, based on the models that it's developed, what it sees is a line of sight to improve the net profitability of your actions by 1.7 million each month. This is going to lead to 4.6 million in additional customer lifetime value retained. And all you have to do is just double your support team, right? That's easy to do. Well, no, it's not, right? What this is doing is informing us what the strategy is to exact the maximum impact on our profitability. But oftentimes, this type of strategy is impossible to execute, right? Double my sales team, yeah, right, or double my support team, yeah, right. It's hard enough just to keep my staff at the current level, let alone try to increase this. So we not only force the models to inform you as to what their strategy is, we give you controls to come in here and say, you know what, there is no chance I am going to be able to increase my headcount that substantially. What could I do? What could I achieve with the existing team that I have now? What would Aible be recommending? And in this case, if we keep the team intact, we're going to see more modest gains, right? Here, we're going to retain around $340,000 more each month by targeting the appropriate customers. And we're going to see a net benefit because we're wasting less time and focusing it on the right customers. We kind of get a double benefit of mitigating waste and gaining some retention. We're going to see around $740,000 worth of net benefit here. But what we also see is Aible's taking a look at these different groups and it's shifting resourcing and saying, if we are this constrained on capacity, we should be spending the most time with our commercial customers because they are the most valuable and the most important to retain. We should really only focus on, in this case, you were talking about you're reaching out to kind of that top 10%. What Aible is identifying is we may be reaching out to, say, the top 25%, top 30% in commercial. We may be only reaching out to the top 5% in mobile and residential because it balances these through an economic optimization to get us that appropriate balance point and make sure that we're getting the maximum benefit. And then the last piece of this is I'm going to flip over to a different project here because I don't have monitoring set up on the churn analysis. But this is a sales example of the Aible monitoring. Now, of course, we monitor the performance of the models, but we also monitor the performance of the entire project where we set up expectations in terms of linearity. What should we achieve for the month or the quarter? And then we are able to balance that against our resourcing and our return, but critically also tracking the behavior. How often were these churn risks followed up with? How often would we actually offer them an additional promo or some type of retention activity? How often do we not offer them any promotion to try to keep them on board and ended up losing them? And this is how we track, and we can track down to the individual rep level how that compliance is going to see, who can we coach to follow along with the recommendations more often. And as Greg alluded to, sometimes reps outperform the model, and we can find those as well and go back to them and say, what are you using that is allowing you to target more effectively than the model? And that becomes yet another place where we can find information that would be beneficial to add to these models. As you would imagine, 249 models orchestrated across 3 different subgroups. This would be an incredible pain to deploy, and we recognize that. So we do have an automated deployment that will actually stand up these models with the appropriate selections behind a REST API. And so that API is automatically stood up once I hit deploy. And even if I come back and I change my strategy, right? So if I go and adjust my business strategy and say, let's say I can increase my headcount by 10% over what I have today, I can very easily do that. I can save my new scenario plus 10%. And now with this scenario saved, I can go ahead and redeploy this with my 10% scenario. And this redeployment actually acts through the same API path. So you don't have to go and hit the IT group and reintegrate this every time the business team makes an adjustment of strategy. And we've recently gone through this. A few of our customers just ceased doing business in Russia. And so we've gone, and those that have it broken down by country, we've gone in with a couple of those and just shut off Russia. Now, when you shut off Russia, that's a big chunk, a big hit to revenue. And what we've then done is said, okay, well, we're going to lose a big chunk of revenue. How do we balance our strategy, get a little bit more aggressive on promos, get some of that revenue back without breaking the bank in terms of, materially destroying our profitability by promoting everything, but clawing back a lot of that loss so that we hit a balance point that is optimal for the business. And you can very easily add the models that you have in here and just run that same optimization across them. And critically, if you don't want to change a single model, right? One of our founding principles when we founded Aible was models are commodities. And we don't want to try to compete on my model's better than your model, right? We bring best practice models in. We have very good data scientists, But at the end of the day, really where we saw the struggles were around that orchestration and collaboration. And so you can bring your model in and use the existing models that you have and simply use the Aible layer then to go and run that balancing and orchestration. And what it will give you is that ability to just with your models, take a look and look at the metrics, and it's going to spit out the threshold for you. So if you're using your model and you run a tuning like this, it's going to give you on your model what the appropriate threshold is to actually dial this in and use this strategy. You would just obviously, if you're using your own models or have them deployed directly, adjust those in your model settings. You can also use the Aible model deployment to just daisy chains.
End result of the predictions, the recommendations within the context of Salesforce, for example, for that churn, because you want your agents to know who to go after, who to target, why. We can deploy that into easily into Tableau dashboards, into Power BI dashboards, as well as into Salesforce. If it's an Oracle application, we can push it into Oracle, into Microsoft Dynamics, all sorts of different places where users need to consume the predictions.